Hey Magdalena, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Kayo?
Doing great. Good to see you. How's your day been so far?
Good to see you. So far, my day has been great. A very good morning. It's morning for me, or relatively
Yeah.
morning. And then, what about you? What time zone are you in?
I'm in London, so it's evening over here, but I love that nature in the background that you got there. That's beautiful. That's
Thank
beautiful.
you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let the viewers know who you are, what you do, and why you do it, Magdalena.
absolutely. Uh, my name is Magdalena Fosse, as probably your viewers know at this point from the introduction, whatever the introduction there is. And I am a clinical psychologist, a couples therapist, sexologist, and certified sex therapist. And what it means in translation, I hold two doctorate degrees. One is in clinical sexology, and the other one is in clinical psychology. And I combine the expert of all three, so the three areas of individual psychology, couples relationships, couples therapy, and sexology and sex therapy. And that's the combined hat that I wear when I work with couples and individuals and other relational formations. I would also add that I'm an author of publications on relationships with the particular focus on polyamory and non-monogamy. And I'm the co-president of the Psychodynamic Couples and Families Institute of New England in Boston area, where I also teach on sexuality and couples therapy. And lastly, I'm also certified in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and very interested in the work, the options of deepening the work that ketamine and other psychedelics provide. Ketamine is the legal substance that we can utilize for our work, both in the individual but also relationally. So that's in the nutshell what I'm doing or who I am.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that elaborate explanation about what you do. How did you decide that you wanted to work with people with their psychology and their sexuality and things like that? What was that journey like for you upon coming up to that moment when you thought to yourself, "This is actually what I want to do"?
Sure. Yeah. So we start with saying that I like the word journey. Nowadays, a lot of people don't like this word, but for me, it's a very deeply meaningful word because it implies the individual, the internal journey, but also the external journey. And externally, I moved from country to country, from culture to culture, and so exploring both myself and then not just exploring, but also experiencing like what it means to be myself in a very different cultural and relational context. And the question of sexuality and intimacy has always been of interest for me, but also how relationships present, how sexuality presents in different cultures at different, obviously different moments in time because you cannot be in two places at the same time. So that really just started to spark this deep interest in wanting to work more deeply with relationship, but with the particular focus on sexuality, intimacy, the romantic connection, or the choice of not going there for people who don't want to go there, and the focus on love. And actually, what I want to say here is that because now in many Western countries, we have a very well established field of sex therapy. And a lot of people are, because that's what your podcast is about. So you are interviewing a lot of really interesting people and then about their backgrounds, what they are doing. So it's terrific that we have this access to in-depth knowledge about sexuality. However, what seems to start to be missing is our knowledge of love. So that's also another thing that is percolating on my mind is like, it feels like we need the field of love therapy, and that's where a lot of my energy is going. And so So it's a trajectory. So going into the sexuality and intimacy when very few people were talking about it, and within that also embracing uh, non-normativity. So that became my particular area of expertise, working with non-normative relationships. So again, non-monogamy and polyamory is one of the non-monogamous formats, but there are so many of them. But also other formats or other ways of being non-normative in the world and in relationships. So from gender questioning to sexuality, is questioning one's sexual identity, orientation, and so on, but also relational options that we have available nowadays. Still, with coming back to the question of love, the love for oneself and the love for the other, whatever that means to each person, because it can encompass so many different things.
Excellent, excellent. So I do want to talk more about the love therapy that you're talking about, and if that relates to the use of a ketamine that you mentioned. But before we get into that, we've all had different struggles when we look at our previous relationships, and we navigate through those to get to where we are now. What have your previous struggles been in previous relationships, and how have you navigated through those to get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a very deep question, and because it's again like it's connected to what I described that I moved from country to country, and relationships form who we are from the earliest point in life. So the relationship with our parents or caregivers, but also with the significant people in our lives early on, and then eventually it becomes about the romantic relationships. So the romantic context or what was of interest for me in my country of origin, which was Poland, was very different from what became the focus of my relational focus and an understanding of relationships in when I moved to Norway, which is had a very different climate, not only the actual climate, but also in terms of how people relate. And then also like how it changed, vastly changed when I moved to the US. So I moved from a more normative way of operating relationally, thinking that, yeah, I want to be with someone. Not necessarily married, but being in a normative relationship, and then not necessarily having a family or children, but then having one partner, to opening up, to really like honoring my own sexuality, my own interest in love, and then noticing these different energies flowing through me, and with interest in what nowadays will be referring to as non-monogamy, and then also exploring different ways of being non-monogamous in the world, and then also concluding for my own sake, but also now for the sake of my clients or patients. I use those terms interchangeably, that it's less about the format, it's about relationships worth having. And that's what motivates me just for my own personal sake, is the creation and maintenance of relationships worth having. And that's what I'm also bringing to my work with people.
Right.
Um, again, moving beyond the format. But again, my background has definitely informed me in terms of what I'm bringing to the table now. So knowing in depth, like how, how it feels, what it means to be in monogamous relationship, deeply loving relationship, that also presents with challenges. And then what it means to be in a more open relationship with different challenges that are present there. And then seeing and recognizing that there is no one golden solution that fixes all of our intrapsychic and relational problems. It's the work we are doing and the work we need to be doing.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that it's not really about the format. So when I hear you say that, like it kind of ties in with what you were saying about love being the kind of basis of everything. So like beyond formats, like if there's an underlying love structure, that is the main structure that is most important, regardless of format, like you were saying. So going back to what we were talking about earlier on, when you were speaking more about the use of ketamine in your therapy and things like that. Um, how does that work, and how does that relate to love therapy? And is it like necessary to use ketamine to get to certain states, or how does it work in your opinion?
Sure. Another very deep question, so I will try to do justice in the short answer, like to to something that can be talked about for a very long time. I will start with a disclaimer. I don't, because I talk about love and then what's percolating for me, like this field of love therapy, it doesn't mean that I make an assumption that everyone should yearn for a loving relationship. Many people choose not to be in a relationship for a number of different reasons, and for them, love might actually present something scary, something that they don't, something even maybe scary in a sense that it's too dangerous to go there. So they want to be in a place that in which they feel comfort with themselves, and that's both in romantic terms and sexual terms, and that also sexually. It doesn't mean that everyone needs to be in a love bound relationship to explore their sexuality. Absolutely not. But still, the love is something bigger than the romantic love for me. It's more about how we truly relate to the world outside of us and then to other people who are a part of our network, whether we choose to be in a relationship or not. So again, it's a very, very deep topic for me. And and it does connect to ketamine in a sense that for anyone familiar with ketamine work or more broadly speaking psychedelic work, there is this what might sound like to many people a cliche with the recognition like, well, I just realized that everything is about love. And that's true, but it's not a cliche. It's also about like coming to a place of really connecting and resetting on a deep level, like of finding one's own inner um, uh, maybe even I would say the word peace, and then contentment with who you are. So there is also an element of self-acceptance, which can also be connected to love. Most people struggle with self-love. Some people have too much of it, but that's a different story. And then because it doesn't mean that they actually have the love of the sort that allows them to be open towards the others. So ketamine doesn't necessarily bring people automatically to the love part, but then because we don't know what will show up in a ketamine session. Some of them can be profound in a beautifully opening way, others can be scary. And so it's not so much about what's showing up because it's not our conscious decision. It's about what's the message behind it? How do we work with it in therapy?
Right, right, right. And looking deeper into psychedelics in general, like, do you feel like there are levels that people cannot reach without trying some of these psychedelics in order to have that sense of self and sense of a love for everything as a whole? Or do you feel like that can be reached without the psychedelics as well?
Psychedelics are not for everyone. And for people who are seekers, for people who maybe are stuck in their patterns, they can provide the opening they need that maybe other therapy formats have not, maybe they have not allowed them to get to that place. But again, that's also not a panacea that which nowadays people often think like, oh, I will have a ketamine session, everything will be fine. And so thinking the tendency towards thinking as a magical pill. Okay, we have a new magical pill. I'm going to jump on it and everything will be okay. That's not how it works. It's still the work you need to do around it. And in ketamine, it's the ketamine session. So taking ketamine is just actually is the smallest part of the whole experience because it truly opens up the window to explore what's showing up in a different way than it's available in traditional talk therapy or somatic experiencing or some other format of therapy. But still, the bulk of the work is integration. What does it mean? So it's about practices, it's healthy practices, um, honoring our way of being in the world in the best possible way, honoring how we relate to other people, our own aspiration to be the best possible versions of ourselves, which again, it's not the case for everyone that that's what the motivation for them is. And maybe they are not ready, maybe they are not in that stage of life yet. So ketamine is a tool. It's one of many tools. It's not a panacea, but
Right,
it's really a tool with so much potential. And then there is a reason why we see this renaissance of interest and research in psychedelics. And because we truly like recognize with at this point with tons of data that it provides this level of, this opens this window of opportunity like for our brains to process things in a different way. That it's, again, that it's possible to get to in through other modalities like meditation, mindfulness practices, but it's a different pathway, and oftentimes this one is maybe a faster pathway, but it's still there are no shortcuts there.
right.
And so yeah, that's in the nutshell.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, so earlier you were speaking about monogamy and non-monogamy and how these different structures benefit different people depending on the type of person that is. So looking further into these relationship dynamics, some people they're in maybe a monogamous relationship, but like they're in one of the partner is maybe interested in opening up the relationship for non-monogamy. But they're afraid that if they mention this to their partner, they're actually going to disrupt the relationship. But they do have kind of an urge or an interest in exploring that. In what ways can they open up this conversation with their partner to open up the relationship and to see how they can explore that together?
Um, Absolutely. So um, in my experience, it's uh, in dyadic relationships, so couples relationships, whether they are married couple or not married, but then and they are in a dyadic relationship, usually one person is more interested than the other in non-monogamy. And even when there is a couple in which both people have some interest in non-monogamy, there might still be a conflict about how much of non-monogamy or they want for their own sake and what kind of non-monogamy. And that's the not only like how to open up and then how to talk about it, but it's also a question of looking deeply inside and then having a conversation or conversations with one's partner who may or may not be open, who might experience a lot of resistance. And and then honoring that again, people are coming from two different places, perhaps, but then they are also trying to find where is their meeting point, and then working through whatever barriers that arise. Because again, it's not the interest of one person in non-monogamy doesn't mean that this relationship will naturally or easily morph into non-monogamy. It may or it may not. So back to the different kinds of non-monogamy. Probably the best known and often uh, what people refer to if they talk about non-monogamy, they talk about polyamory. Polyamory is just one of the formats, which implies sexual and romantic openness with other people. So the ability to form romantic relationships with others, which may or may not be sexual. And then there are formats of non-monogamy that are predominantly sexual, but also how they are conducted, it really depends on what people are choosing. So one format is don't ask, don't tell. So basically you're, let's say at a conference, you are traveling, and then I'm not going to ask what you are doing. We have an implicit understanding that we have the freedom to explore sexual connections with other people as long as it doesn't cause harm. And then harm can be both in sexual ways, so the sexual health practices, or it can be in a relational way. So, okay, we are open to, we have an agreement, implicit or a more or less explicit agreement to be sexually involved with other people, but also do everything you need to do not to bring potential risk in terms of sexual health. So sexually transmitted diseases and so on to our relationship.
Right, right, right. Yeah,
And so that. That's a very, very broad topic again, like already, like what kind of openness?
Right, right, right. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, some people with a monogamous mindset, they'll hear that and say, "Oh, people are that are non-monogamous. It means there's something missing in the relationship." Do you think there's any truth to this, or do you feel like a relationship can be complete even if it's non-monogamous? Or what is your viewpoint on that?
That goes back to the mantra I'm using, the relationship or relationships worth having. It's not that one format is more complete than the other. And because many people depending on the stage of life, on their own intrapsychic development, they can move between monogamy, non-monogamy, and depending on who they are meeting, the context of their situation, they can form a fulfilling relationship that it's as an example, it can be to make it. So I'm trying to make it more concrete, so
Take
people
your
can
time.
identify as non-monogamous and say like, well, at heart, I'm polyamorous. But with this person and in this context, I'm actually embracing monogamy because it works for me. And maybe I will never veer from it and stay at it. And then, or maybe it will change over time. So again, we live at times in most Western cultures when there is much more or there is a growing acceptance of relational fluidity. So we have moved beyond what was referred to as serial monogamy, and now, where one relationship had to end and then for the other to start, we are now embracing the possibility of relationships being concurrent and potentially rewarding. But also, when there are more people involved, the degree of involvement also will inevitably vary because people might have an infinite love. That's the saying coming from polyamory. It doesn't mean that they have infinite time to devote to the relationships of their choices. And time is always a limitation, which also defines like, what people actually choose to do, and then what they search for in terms of like what provides them with fulfillment.
Excellent, excellent.
This is really like very, very, very big topic with no, once again, with no single solution or answer.
Yeah, there's definitely multi layers to the questions I'm asking you. So I do appreciate the way that you are putting it all together. Yeah. So when we look into couples that have chosen monogamy, for example, and even couples that like are non-monogamous sometimes, there can be jealousy that comes up in a relationship. For example, if people are monogamous, one partner might say that the other partner is always looking at this person or always doing this and they're suspicious about this, and a lot of the time there's nothing going on, so the partner that has been accused of things, it starts to get frustrated, and they don't know what to do about this type of jealousy, and even in non-monogamy there's still sometimes a feeling of jealousy even though there was like consent to open up the relationship. So, how can this feeling of jealousy be dealt with in relationships, and how could people understand each other and what they're feeling when it comes to that?
Yeah, this is an excellent question because the question of jealousy is big in non-monogamy, and or more recognized like non that jealousy is a part of non-monogamous, especially polyamorous explorations or identification. Um, and jealousy is also present in monogamy, depending on how the relationship is conducted. And uh, a there is a prevailing perception of jealousy being an intrapsychic experience, so residing within the person. But actually, jealousy is a relational experience. It's a complex relational experience. And that's a key misunderstanding that the person who is feeling jealousy needs to do all their work on their own because that's where the jealousy is located. It's true only to a degree that we are experiencing it internally, but how it plays out, it's relational. And it's a complex relational experience because we are a system. So when we are in a relationship, so we are in a system with the other person in the dynamic system. So what's coming from the other person can help us to work through jealous feelings, or it can fuel under the feelings of jealousy. Adding to it, jealousy is not one feeling, but many. It's a complex relational and emotional experience because the aspects of jealousy or the feelings that go into jealousy, or what we know as jealousy, can include sadness, anger, resentment, hope, the sense of rejection, the sense of abandonment, insecurity, and so it's mostly negative, and it can be possessive. Jealousy is also a relational signal. So again, jealousy has a very bad reputation, and with the perception that everyone needs to do whatever they need to do to eliminate jealousy. Because if jealousy is present, something is wrong. I look at it differently. I look at the jealousy as a signal. Okay, something is happening. Something is being brought up from one's own past or relationally. Something is invited to be looked at and then to understood. So it's a signal, and it's relational, and it's up to the individual, but it's up to the relationship. So here the dyad or a couple to understand why it's showing up and why it's showing up in this particular format. So working with jealousy in relationships, I look at it as it's a signal. It's usually a signal of a threat, that there is some perceived or real threat to the relationship. And it's a signal like, oh, I need to protect this relationship because I deeply value it. So there is a healthy element here, which is the opposite of possessive jealousy. You cannot do anything possessive slash pathological, not giving the other person to be freedom to be an autonomous being. So again, spectrum of jealousy, but then allowing for looking at it as like this is a signal of a threat, real or perceived, is it it opens up to deep work that can actually strengthen the relationship, deepen the relationship, deepen the understanding, the individual understanding of one's internal dynamics and what's happening in this particular relationship.
Right,
I would,
right.
to me, it's also very helpful to distinguish, which many people don't. It's to distinguish between jealousy and envy. People often use these two terms interchangeably. Uh, Envy is a wish to have what somebody else has, and it often has a hostile element. So, like, I'm envious of what you are doing with the other person in non-monogamy. It's still a signal. And jealousy is a protective mechanism. So it's like, I'm going to protect what I value. So I'm going to fight for it. Even if this fight or how it comes across might be ugly, but it still comes from it's like, no, 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 this is precious. So, and then
Yeah.
this is hostile. Like, I'm going to like attack you or attack the other person. So, so there are different underlying mechanisms.
Yeah, for sure. I would also say like the stronger the trust, the less the need for a jealousy, and then and that need to feel like you need to protect something because if the trust is strong enough, then you know that there's more safety in that. But speaking about trust, some people, let's use the example of someone that's been in a monogamous relationship and maybe infidelity has happened in that relationship, so their trust was broken. So maybe they explored different dynamics. They went into non-monogamy and in that scenario, maybe the trust was also broken, whereas they had an agreement, but the person wasn't ethical about it because they were practicing maybe ethical non-monogamy and the person wasn't being ethical. So now this person feels like they don't have the capacity to trust anymore because of their experience. So this type of person, how can they start to rebuild their sense of trust in relationships and in people after these type of experiences?
Yeah. That's probably the question I am asked most often, or it's brought up most often in my individual or couples work or relational work. How can I rebuild trust? because the other person has stepped outside of the bounds, agreed upon bounds, or the boundaries that they were, I assume that they were in place, but they were maybe not there. And then, so how can I learn to trust this person again? And here, people often want some specific tools, like what can I do, how do I understand trust, what can I do to make sure that the other person can reassure me. And then the tricky part is that there is no specific methods that allow people to explicitly feel less more trustful or more trusting. Trust is implicit. Trust is rooted in belief, and that I trust that you have my well-being in mind. Not only your own well-being, but also mine. That I'm learning to trust that you're a complex being. You might have all these complex feelings about yourself, about other people, what you want to do sexually, romantically, etc. But that you know me well enough. Obviously, I'm talking here about relationships that of some longevity. That you know what would be difficult for me, and that you are willing to honor it. And then so I'm trusting, or I'm learning to trust that you have my well-being in mind, that you don't intend to hurt me. And then if you are in conflict, that we'll figure out how to talk about it. So we can minimize the harm, the hurt and harm. That's what builds trust.
Right, for sure, for sure. Well, Magdalena, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everything that you shared. Where could people find you, find out more about you, and find out more about what you do?
Oh, absolutely. The easiest way to find me is going to my website, which is www.drfosse.com. And so there will be my email, there will be my phone number. So you can put it in the link to the podcast. So again, drfosse.com. That's the best way.
Excellent. And for the viewers, all of that information will be in the description so you can get in touch with Magdalena and find out more about what she does. Once again, Magdalena, thank you so much for coming on. Any final words before we wrap up?
No, thank you for inviting me, and then thank you for the work you are doing. So again, like spreading the word, and then also being motivated to interview people coming from so many different cultures, backgrounds, and then coming with their more personal stories. Not only like, oh, I'm this person, like I'm doing XYZ, but also like making it more uh, personable. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Magdalena.
Mm.